all for being here today. We are going to get started here in just a minute, just at 1 p.m. We have so much good information that we want to make sure that we're giving all of this time and be respectful of people's time. And so the discussion that we're going to have today is about sustainable energy. And so if there is any problem with these webinars, feel free to unmute yourself and say, hey, we can't see what you're seeing, because a lot of times I can't really see that things are going wrong. And so I need a little bit of feedback on this. So thank you again for being part of this. It is 1 p.m., so we're going to get started. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the Climate Adaptation Plan webinar series. We have a little bit of background noise, so I'm going to mute somebody. So we will be patrolling this participant list and muting people just during the discussion, just during the presentation period. And so it looks like that worked out okay. So I'm going to, Aaron, if you could let me know if you're seeing kind of a full screen.
Affirmative, full screen.
Perfect, thank you so much. Welcome to our 8th installment of our Climate Adaptation Webinar Plan, or Climate Adaptation Plan webinar series. Today we are really excited to talk all about energy in its various forms and different ways that it interacts with Indigenous food system, as well as tribal sovereignty and governance. We always can ask everyone if you could turn your video off while our presenters are presenting, just to save on bandwidth. We will also be muting people who are not presenters during the time that is allotted for presentation, but we will have a discussion here at the end that will allow you to really open up your cameras and share with us if you'd like. And so there is always the chat box available to put your questions as they come into your mind, or to have discussions that aren't immediately relevant to the topic at hand. We've had a lot of people share their stories and experiences in the chat box, and it's welcome. It's available for you to do that. And so just a few housekeeping notes. Thank you, Aaron Warden, again for moderating. It's been really great to have that extra assistance here on this webinar. And so he is the one who's been admitting you in from the lobby, and we're really grateful for his participation. Again, chat box is open for questions or discussion, as always, and we will be having a discussion period here at the end, so there will be an opportunity to unmute yourself and talk. We always encourage people to be respectful and to be thinking towards the future, and remember that we all come here for wanting to move towards a good and fair future. And we always have the raise hand function, but I'll talk a little bit more about etiquette for discussions a little bit later. And so now I am hoping that we have, yes, General Counsel Chairman Lindsay Watchman is here. Lindsay, I would love to have you kick us off with a few good words, please.
All righty, I will do so. Thank you for asking, Colin. Again, just Makaskatiaya, Minam Hanyawatona, Kilaipa, in the lights, keep him, kick Ki Lain Oikalo, Kalapotis, Mayat Maka, Minam Tatakishma. Just wanted to thank Creator for this day and for this gathering, where we have an opportunity to come together with one heart and one mind and work on behalf of our community and our loved ones. And again, just want to thank the Creator for bringing our energy here to focus. I also want to acknowledge that there has been sadness over the last week with losses of community members, and we ask for the strength to turn those losses into energy and to effort moving forward to make life easier for the rest of us, that we can enjoy a healthy lifestyle here on our Umatilla Indian Reservation. So, Indian Creator, thank you for bringing us together and guide our words, our thoughts, and our actions today.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. And thank you for, again, mentioning the loss in our community. It was definitely something that I had to consider if we were going to go forward having this webinar about loss. So I'm hearing some background noise and I don't know where it's coming from. So if everyone could try and make sure that their mics are muted to make sure that we have quality of sound, that would be perfect. Thank you, that's perfect. So just quickly, again, to remind us where we are, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the Climate Adaptation Plan. We have, this has been an amazing webinar series that we have had sharing information with and opportunities and stories with one another. And so to kick it off, we started first to talk about the impacts that climate change will have on surface and groundwaters. And we spent some time talking about first foods availability and access with our fish, our big game, and our roots and berry species. And then we moved on to talk about how those built environments, our homes, our roads, our buildings are going to be impacted by climate change. And then last time we spoke about human health and happiness and the impact that that may have to our physical well-being, as well as that emotional connection and that connection to our land and our first foods. And so today I'm pretty excited that we get to talk about energy production and use. And so we have really amazing speakers today, and I will give them their full time, and so I will stop talking here in a minute. We're going to kick it off with Patrick Mills, works with the Energy and Environmental Sciences program here for the tribe, and he's going to talk about the energy potential, the energy generation potential here on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And then we're very honored and privileged to be welcoming Energy Trust of Oregon is going to talk with us about their programs, some demand side reduction strategies, and renewable energy. And then we're very fortunate, Althea Hustes-Wolf couldn't be here in person because her family has experienced a loss, but she was so dedicated and kind to pre-record a presentation for us about the lessons or energy and long-term stewardship that we can take from the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. And then finally, we'll have Mason Murphy is the program manager for the Energy and Environmental Sciences program for the tribe. And he's going to talk about how tribal sovereignty interacts with federal and state, or well, mostly federal energy agencies. And so without further ado, am going to welcome Patrick, if you are available. And again, I'd like to remind everyone, if we could turn our cameras off to save bandwidth during the presentations, we will have a chance to share after that. And so Patrick, I'm going to ask if you can hear me. I can see your slides. I might have had to mute you. So I'm hoping that that will not be a problem. You might have to call in again. We aren't hearing you, Patrick, so I think I might have muted you unnecessarily. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. This transition to online has been a learning experience for everyone, and so we are definitely all working on the different technology. I actually can't unmute you, Patrick, and so I'm not really sure how to do that on a phone. I think *6 is how you do it on Zoom. I don't know if that is also true for Teams. So you might have to call again. Yeah, we can hear you. Perfect.
There we go. *6 worked. All right.
Take it away.
Alrighty. Good afternoon. Sorry, what was that?
Sorry, you are way ahead of me. Take it away. Thanks for being here.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Mills, and I'm an engineer with the Confederated Tribes' DNR Energy and Environmental Sciences program. I'm going to be talking about the renewable energy on the Umatilla Indian Reservation. So I'm going to start with the conservation of energy and how that applies to transforming energy in the many different forms that energy can take. And then I'll be talking a bit about the energy resource potentials of the Umatilla Indian Reservation with examples. And then finally, I'm going to be ending on the Strategic Energy Plan. It's a project that we've been working on pretty diligently lately, and glad to tell you a bit about that. So to start with, the first law of thermodynamics is the conservation of energy. And basically what that means is that energy is neither created nor destroyed, but it can be transformed from one form to another. And so these figures down below, that is what I'm showing. So to start with the top left image, we have a biomass energy facility that is located in John Day, Oregon. And essentially what we're doing is taking chemical energy that's in the biomass and we convert that to thermal or heat energy. And they're using that to heat their high school there with a lot of success. And then next, the windmills. A lot of people are familiar with those. Basically what's happening is kinetic energy from the wind is being transformed into electrical energy. And then in the next figure to the right, you see a helicopter that's flying. What's happening is chemical energy is being converted into mechanical energy. And also in that image, we see a picture of a dam. And that is the potential energy of the water being converted into electrical energy. And moving down below, the picture of the solar modules, we have solar energy being converted into electrical energy. And finally, that lower image on the right is a geothermal power plant, where they're taking geothermal energy, converting it into mechanical energy, and finally into electrical energy. It's being used by thousands of houses. So energy surrounds us. I mean, it's really a part of our everyday life, whether you realize it or not. It is very foundational to life and really everything that happens in the universe. Whether it's solar, radiant solar energy coming from the sun, or electrical energy being discharged during a thunderstorm, or the geothermal energy inside the earth. There's a ton of it there. People often refer to that as the heat beneath your feet, but there's vast amounts of heat energy trapped inside the earth, and some scientists actually estimate that the inside of the earth is actually hotter than the surface of the sun, surprisingly. So yeah, energy is very, very vital and essential role to everything that happens. And that really does include, for example, adenosine triphosphate, which is chemical energy used by all life forms, the bonding of individual atoms to form bigger molecules such as water, or even driving to work or riding your bike or snowboarding or skiing. Anytime you have movement or an elevation change, you are dealing with mechanical energy. And so there's kinetic energy and also potential energies that are part of mechanical energy. So now moving on to the more site-specific resource potentials of the reservation. First one I want to talk about was the solar photovoltaic resource, and that's the resource that's needed for generating electricity using a solar panel. That resource is pretty much uniformly distributed across the entire reservation. And on an annual average, we have about 4.2 kilowatt hours per meter squared day. And so keep in mind, that's an annual average. During the summertime, it's quite a bit higher, and in the wintertime, it's quite a bit lower. But averaged out over the entire year, we have about 4.2 kilowatt hours per meter squared per day, which is pretty good. It's not the best. If you move further south, like to Arizona or New Mexico, the solar resource increases. But still, it's very viable here on the reservation. And so a project the EESP was involved with a few years back, and is actually technically still ongoing, was the construction of a solar PV array behind the field station. That's shown in the image below. And we constructed that in 2018, and since then, it's generated more than 341 megawatt hours of alternating current energy. And that's as of today. And what this equates to, this amount of energy, if it had been generated from fossil sources, it would have released more than 51 tons of greenhouse gases. And so putting this in the context of climate change, what these clean renewable energy systems do is they prevent the release of greenhouse gases that would have otherwise been released if the energy had been generated from fossil sources. And real quick, I'm going to see if I can bring this up. Stand by. All right. Can everybody see that is the real-time energy generation of the solar panel? Is that being shown right now?
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Okay. So the overcast is getting a little worse here. Normally, if this was a really sunny day, the AC power now that you see would be closer to about 90 kilowatts, and that would be how much energy generation was taking place instantaneously. But yeah, this is a really nifty tool. It's available. Anyone who wants to check this out can follow the link. I believe it's on our ESP website page. Yeah, production data is available on here, and it's just a really handy tool for seeing how well our solar system is performing on a day-to-day basis. Okay, I'm going to switch back real quick. All right, now moving on to the wind resource potential of the reservation. The wind resource is needed for spinning wind turbines that generate electricity. And this resource is very site-specific, unlike the solar resource. It's highly dependent on topography as well as other factors. And so down below in this figure, you can see that as we move east into the higher lands of the reservation, that is typically where we see a better potential for generating electricity from the wind resource. And so far, the ESP, as far as I'm aware, has not been involved with the wind project, but we do have the wind turbine that was put in at TCI. So there has been some work done in this field. Then next, I wanted to talk about a few of the many other renewable energy resources available to the tribes here on the reservation. A few of those include biomass, which can be used for generating baseload heat and or power. The U.S. Forest Service actually recently approached us. They want to provide the tribes with biomass for doing an energy, some sort of renewable energy project with it. It could either be, generating heat or also heat and power. So the figure down below on the left is an image of a biomass boiler facility, and that is heating a number of buildings. And also, we have an opportunity to do pump storage hydropower projects, and those are primarily for energy storage for grid balancing. And I don't think we've done a project here on the reservation as of yet, but there has been discussions of it. And then in the city of Pendleton, the water municipality actually has an aquifer storage and recovery system. And then also Madison Farms near Echo, Oregon, have an aquifer storage and recovery project completed. And so those would be examples of pump storage hydropower. And I just want to point out that resource assessments and feasibility studies, if we wanted to pursue projects like these, we would need to complete those first. And that's really how you determine if a resource is developable. And then a few more renewable energy options available to us here. Renewable hydrogen, you maybe have heard me talk of that in the past, but basically that can be used for transportation and for grid balancing. Hydrogen can be produced from water using an electrolyzer, and as long as the electricity used in that electrolyzer comes from a renewable source, you can say it's renewable hydrogen. So it can be truly carbon-free and not emit any greenhouse gases. And then once you have that hydrogen, it can be recombined with oxygen in a fuel cell, for example, to generate electricity. And so when cars use hydrogen fuel cells, the only emission is water vapor, which is pretty cool. And then also geothermal. I know we have a geothermal resource here. It's just a matter of how viable it is. And so resource assessment is underway for that. But if we are to proceed with a geothermal development, basically what we'd be getting is baseload heat and or power. And so if we wanted both heat and power, for example, you could heat a bunch of greenhouses, you could do district heating, or we can just generate electricity and power a bunch of buildings and homes that way. So then the figures down below, I just wanted to demonstrate that hydrogen is really really central to the renewable energy economy. That figure shows how it's really connected to most everything in our current energy sector. And then that figure to the right of that is actually the Pepper Mills geothermal system. So the 2.1 million square foot Pepper Mill Resort and Casino in Reno, Nevada is actually heated 100% using geothermal energy. And so this very well could be doable here on the reservation as well. We're looking into that. So a little more on geothermal. The resource assessment that is currently underway started a few years back, and phase 1 was completed in 2018. Phase 2 is still underway, and the image that you see below shows a few stars. Those are the primary drilling targets that we're looking at. And during the next phase of the project, we would like to install temperature gradient boreholes to measure how the temperature changes as you go further and further down. And we would like to install those to depths of roughly 5,000 feet, which is a pretty lofty goal, but I think the scientific and project development data that we could get from that would be invaluable. And so yeah, basically this project, this resource assessment project, is going to provide us, the tribes, with the data for determining the feasibility of developing a geothermal power plant. All right, now onto this strategic energy plan. Just to give you a brief overview of it, this plan will establish the CTUIR community's energy vision and guide for the organization's energy conservation and generation efforts for years to come. This is sort of the master plan for how the tribes want to handle energy-related topics and implement projects over time. This figure is basically the process that we've chosen to follow. It's based on the DOE Office of Indian Energy Handbook for Tribal Strategic Energy Plans. And just to give you an idea for where we are at in this process, we're somewhere in here, if you can see that, just below form leadership team. We're in the process of hiring a subcontractor to help us with all this other stuff. So more on this to come soon. And I think we can, at this point, say confidently that a survey is going to be released early this summer that's going to enable the community to help us form this energy vision. That's really the driving force for all this other stuff. And a little more on the strategic energy plan. All available energy options are going to be provided for the tribe's consideration. We're going to have a really exhaustive list there to start with, and then kind of whittle it down based on, the local preferences and what is actually achievable. Once the plan is complete, the resource assessments and feasibility studies will be completed for preferred energy options. So not every energy option is going to be pursued. There are some that are not favorable here, but for some, such as the geothermal resource, we definitely want to take a closer look at those to see if they are in fact developable. And then, so once you complete your resource assessments and feasibility studies, at that point you can determine if you want to proceed with resource development. And so the figures down below kind of illustrate this. We start here on the lower left, and first you have to, I guess, recognize that there could be a potential resource available. And at that point, you can go and do your resource assessments and favorability studies. And that's where we're at with the geothermal project. And then finally, once we know if the resource is developable, then we would proceed with the next stage of development. And what you would essentially end up with is, a geothermal power plant of sorts. So just a quick example of what we got going. And that is all I have for now. Are there any questions?
So now is an opportunity to ask Patrick clarifying questions. We want to save some of those more discussion-heavy questions for the end. I know, Patrick, I have questions for you about the ability to use that hydro pump kind of storage with the wastewater recapture system that Public Works and Planning has been kind of trying to put together, but that's a more discussion question. So if anybody has any questions for Patrick, now would be a great time to ask them. All right, hearing none, I think, thank you so much, Patrick. It's really great to hear the energy generation potential. Do you have any closing?
And Tone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, please.
Okay, yeah. And I just been following the earlier, the presentation and the maps that were being are being used, and the map that reflects the reservation after it was reduced down from the 512,000 or 300 square miles. But I'm just wondering, when you're doing an assessment of energy potential, is it just within that within the reservation, or is it including the seeded areas, Hanford and McNary Dam and those places like that? Are staff looking at that? The whole picture, the big picture, that made the big picture, and then all the projects that go on within that. That's all.
Right, that's a very good question. I can say that for some of these resources, such as the solar PV resource, the data is already available. And so, yeah, we could easily say, in those other areas, what the resource potential is, but not for all of them. For some, wind, I haven't seen any data for that one. And then definitely not geothermal. We're, just focusing on the reservation. But yeah, great point. And I think that data on a broader area could definitely be valuable to the tribes.
I think.
Oh, I think we lost maybe a connection. I think that was a really great question. If there aren't any other clarifying questions for Patrick, I think we should move on. We also have some other really great speakers to talk to. So thank you, Patrick. I was wondering if you had any last words you wanted to close out with?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I look forward to any follow-up questions or discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. And so next up, Patrick did a really good job of introducing the energy potential on the reservation, but what exactly are we talking about when we talk about renewable energy, as well as maybe some ways that we increase energy efficiency to reduce demand for energy. And so I want to welcome Karen Appler and her amazing team, and I'll let you take it away, Karen.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see your slides.
Perfect, great. Well, hello and happy Friday. Thank you, Colleen, so much for the ability to present to the Climate Adaptation Plan group and be part of this webinar series. It's just a joy to interact with all of you and hear this information. I have a feeling that we're going to be doing as much learning as we will be doing sharing today. And it's just been really great in this time of social distancing, how we've used technology to overcome, being apart, and it's been able to keep us connected and share information. So I am an outreach manager for the Energy Trust of Oregon, and I am based out of a home office in Pendleton. Prior to COVID, I was actually only one of 3 staff members who did not report to the Portland office. And my role is largely to provide program information to customers and stakeholders across program markets in residential, commercial, agricultural, industrial, and renewable. But in addition to connecting customers to our resources and incentives, another part of my role is actually to make sure that our customers in Eastern Oregon are top of mind for our program staff, so services can be tailored to support rural communities and needs of specific communities. So what I'm hearing from you all today is almost as important as being able to share this information. So in addition to my position, there's actually a lot of smart people, technical experts, and analysts at Energy Trust, including contractors, field staff, trade allies who support our program areas. And I have some of them, there's names up on our slide today. I think Donald Williams probably doesn't need an introduction to you all, but he is newly on board as our existing buildings energy advisor for Eastern Oregon. We are also joined by Jenny Hall, who is a senior project manager of our solar program and has a focus in community resiliency. And Dave Muldahl, who is our senior program manager of what we call other renewables, and that's renewables that fall outside the realm of solar for our programs. So, you know, Colleen was kind enough to share with me the draft Climate Adaptation Plan, which helped to inform our agenda of what we would be sharing with you today. So I'm going to provide a quick overview about Energy Trust, who we are and what we do. And then just to kind of help frame what the possibilities are for future strategy, I wanted to provide some past and current engagement that Energy Trust is working on in the realm of energy efficiency, just to help consider for this group, you know, where future investments might lay. And then I'm going to pass the ball to Jenny, who will review solar and talk about resiliency strategies, and Dave, who will talk about other renewables programs and project feasibility support. So a little bit about us. As an independent customer-focused nonprofit, we stay true to our mission and message. And as an independent nonprofit, this helps us with our credibility in customers, stakeholders, as well as other folks in the industry. Our programs are dedicated to serving the investor-owned utilities, which is about 1.6 million customers of Portland General Electric, Pacific Power, Northwest Natural, Cascade Natural Gas, Avista, and Northwest Natural customers in Southwest Washington. So the primary focus of the two utilities, as you well know, that we represent on reservation land would be Pacific Power and Cascade Natural Gas here in Eastern Oregon. Also, our funding is a result of state legislation, tariffs, and other requirements on these utilities to meet energy efficiency goals. So customers of these utilities pay a small dedicated percentage of their utility bills to support a variety of energy efficiency and renewable energy services programs in Eastern Oregon and Southwest Washington. We are guided by a volunteer board of directors. We also have 3 advisory councils, and we are overseen by the Public Utility Commission. So our investments are focused in 3 core areas: cost-effective energy efficiency. You know, energy efficiency is one of the most affordable resources to saving energy. And like many programs nationwide, to ensure a return on investment for our customers, we use these cost effectiveness tests to guide us in determining when to offer an incentive and the amount of the incentive that we have to offer. We also have a focus in making more affordable renewable energy systems. This will be talked in greater detail by Jenny and Dave, but we offer early project development assistance and installation incentives for solar, hydropower, biopower, and geothermal systems, you know, like a lot of what Patrick went over. And then transforming markets to offer more energy efficient projects. This has to do with accessibility. So we work with NEA, which is the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, to make energy efficient projects, services, and behaviors a standard practice, and you know, essentially develop the market in that realm. LED bulbs is a great example of Energy Trust buying them down at the retail level so the customer, to encourage customer use. So what does this mean to date? So Energy Trust formed in 2002. The results of our work since that time have been about 1.8 billion in utility customer funds, saving and generating an 724 average megawatts, and saving about 65 million annual therms. Investments have transformed over 718,000 homes and businesses in Oregon and Washington. There have been 14,500 renewable energy systems that are generating clean power. And these investments have already helped participating customers save about $3.4 billion on their energy bills so far. And over time, these utility bill savings will add up to approximately $7.7 billion. That's stat on the slide. So these investments have, I think particularly relevant to this group, kept 29.3 million tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, which is equivalent to removing 6 million cars from roads in Oregon for a year. And then this graphic, in a weird way, if you can follow me here, it has kind of reminded me of that Venn diagram that I've seen on past webinars that shows the intersection of the climate adaptation, the different wheels that intersect, sort of the Venn diagram thing. But this is a graphic that we carried, which is about how energy trust programs and assisting communities with energy needs can influence other things like water savings, facilities upgrades and infrastructure upgrades, more livable homes, better health, and resiliency. And while it's common for folks to think of our programs as very project-based, we are actually increasing the ways that our programs are supporting communities, treating communities holistically like a customer. Through this level of engagement, we're able to learn and gain an understanding of those local priorities and leverage those interests to make projects happen and reach customers who we might not have been able to serve previously. So this is a review of the past and current engagement. We're providing some technical information about those programs. Some of what I hope I'm about to share are projects that you might be aware of, but not necessarily the level of involvement from Energy Trust or maybe all of the different energy efficiency features within these projects. Apologies that I don't have a photo up here. I think for some reason my latest slide deck did not refresh. So the Wildhorse expansion phase B, which added your food court and bowling alley, which was completed in fall of 2020, was a pretty fantastic project. I'm so happy to see it have carried forward, and it's a really super cool facility. That project worked very closely with our new commercial buildings program. And just wanted to call out, that I would say that in development of tribal projects, CTUIR really knows how to bring Energy Trust in early to support that work. You'll note at the bottom the phase 2 hotel expansion participated in our early design assistance, which is a specific incentive for Path to Net Zero, where we are able to help make recommendations on the building design and programming to offer the most significant resources that we have available, in addition to making recommendations on passive design features that would help with energy efficiency. The next one is the Nikiwawe Education Center, which was completed in fall of 2019. One of the things I like the most about this particular building is that a lot of the energy efficiency was obtained through passive and active building design, which includes things like building orientation, daylighting, high performance building envelope, high performance windows, solar heat gain, and shading, all of which those types of features do not need to use energy and can reduce the overall building load and considerations for the heating and cooling. Also, VRF, which is a variable refrigerant flow with a ductless heat pump, was used, and that provides heating and cooling through liquid rather than the air, so it's exceedingly more energy efficient. And you can see some of the other features including that we assisted with, including early design, Path to Net Zero, technical assistance, Path to Net Zero. We provided installation incentives, and then commissioning for folks who are not familiar. That is a way of balancing the heating and cooling system so it's running at its optimum and is its most efficient. It's also very overlooked, and a building, even though it's brand new, can have its control settings off. So we do commissioning for building occupancy. We also do retro commissioning for existing buildings, which can result in very significant savings. This particular building is performing 44.7% more efficient than another building built to code at the same size with the same relative usage. And renewable generation at this facility has been planned, so the roof structure is in place, but it has not been installed. Yellowhawk Tribal Health Center. This is another facility that I think a lot of you are familiar with. Energy Trust was very embedded in the process and design with this building. It had high-level energy efficiency goals. I also want to tell folks too, for those who may not know, it was the first of its kind. It was the first tribal health center that was built on a path to net zero track. And it was performing at the time of completion 60% more efficient than buildings of its same size and usage. And again, this building incorporated a lot of passive energy efficiency techniques before even the mechanical systems were considered. You've probably all seen the solar panels in the covered parking area. The roof structure is also prepared for a solar system. And you can see that with the savings that are being obtained, it's about $58,000 in energy costs a year that are being offset by the planning and construction. The other thing I wanted to mention was the tribe's involvement in strategic energy management. This strategic energy management, or SEM, is a cohort-driven model that helps participants look at how buildings and occupants and staff are using energy by examining building systems, equipment, operating procedures, and occupant behaviors. They begin by focusing on low and no cost operations and maintenance for improvements that will deliver energy savings, and then sort of cycle up into those higher level investments that might require advanced budgeting or operational planning. Participants attend workshops with their cohort. They learn best practices integrating energy management, receiving templates, examples, tools, and support from energy coaches, with a range of technical and organizational expertise from our program staff. In addition to incentives, which is kind of what we're known for, we also have, through this program, milestone incentives that an organization can receive when they participate each time that they reach one of those milestones. There's also intern incentives that are available, which helps to cover the cost of hiring an intern who works on strategic energy management related activities, and education opportunities. So, for example, when I was mentioning the commissioning, there are programs for building operator certificates that Energy Trust will essentially cover the cost for facility staff, in addition to other resources and training that would be applicable to that work. So the tribe actually has two major employers who are involved in our Eastern Oregon SEM cohort. And my goal of sharing this with you today was just to bring awareness as the tribe is considering energy, you're embarking on your strategic energy plan, just creating that awareness of what is already being done in the realm of energy efficiency in the community. And that there's a culture that I know everyone also really knows and is in touch with. And then other recent projects, just to make note of, Mission Market took advantage of some lighting projects for LED. Wildhorse Golf Clubhouse took advantage of what we call individual incentives for lighting, HVAC, and kitchen equipment for that building. And then we are working with your housing department, as well as individual homeowners, on a wealth of different residential programs that we have. We are connected to some of the development that is going on at the new Nikiawe community. We supported the Tillicum Grain project that was built in 2015. And for those of you who are in the area, Lucky 7, we are actually providing incentives for the new homes being placed there. The manufactured homes are for energy efficiency. So that is through our pilot program. So I now will pass the ball to Jenny Hall. Again, she's a senior project manager for our solar program, and she'll be able to talk to you a little bit more about what we have to offer.
Hearing, there we go. Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Okay, there we go. Hi, everybody. My name's Jenny Hall, and I'm with the Solar Program Energy Trust, as Karen mentioned. I'm going to have a few slides I'll be going through with you here today to talk about some of about solar a little bit more specifically. And to talk through the technology and the available incentives, but I always like to start with a few key points about solar that I want to make sure you hear. Solar works in Oregon, as Patrick described in much more detail earlier. It's great that you've done this specific analysis for the reservation. Energy Trust has incentives for solar projects to decrease the cost of going solar. And we can help you get started. Really, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here in maybe much more specifics is the fact that we really strive to make solar easy and help you take the first step. So I expect we each have different levels of familiarity with how a solar electric system works when it's installed on a home or on a business or on your property. So I just wanted to talk through specifically how a solar electric system functions. So the solar panels themselves are mounted on your home or ground mounted, like you saw in the pictures. And when the sun comes out, those panels start producing electricity. That electricity is sent back to a piece of equipment called an inverter. And that changes that electricity into something that your home or your business can use, into the kind of electricity that you can plug into an outlet in your wall and make use of. That electricity is being used when the sun's out. Any electrical appliances in your home or business are using that solar power first. And if there is extra power, then it's going back to the grid. And that's through a process called net metering. Back when we used to have meters that could spin backwards, we would talk about how you were spinning your meter backwards in the middle of the day. But now they're all digital, and so it's much less satisfying. When the electric grid goes down, your solar system is designed, if it does not have battery storage attached to it, to turn off. And that's a safety feature. I'll talk a little bit more about batteries a little later, but it's just something to keep in mind while we're looking at this graphic here. So the solar program at Energy Trust is a little unique in that we have a network of trade ally solar contractors who specialize in solar that we work with, and they're located all around the state. The solar program works directly with those contractors, and it has expectations of them on the levels of insurance that they carry. We expect them to have slightly higher levels of insurance than the state contractors board does. And we have expectations for the customer service they provide. On the projects themselves, we also have some above code design and installation requirements that every project must meet in order to qualify for incentives from Energy Trust. And that is because you can design and install a solar system that meets the code and would never produce electricity, which is not what we want for any customer. Through our incentive application process, contractors work with customers to design a system that meets their needs, and then the contractor is responsible for filling out all of the paperwork. They complete the design, complete the incentive applications, and submit it to Energy Trust on your behalf. And at that point, we do a technical review of the project to make sure that it's going to meet our requirements. It's a lot easier to change a design with an eraser at that time than it is to get back up on a roof later. And once the system is installed, the contractor lets us know. We go out to the site to make sure that the system that was installed is the system the contractor said they were going to install, and that system meets all of our installation requirements. In addition to the incentive dollars that we provide a project, this is also a service that we provide for customers interested in solar. Solar incentives that we provide can be kind of roughly broken down into incentives that are upfront for the design and development of a solar project, and incentives that are available for the installation itself. For different kinds of projects, we kind of interact with the customer and with the contractor with the project a little bit differently, and those incentives show up in different ways, but that's kind of the two buckets. So for new construction projects, we integrate really closely with the new construction energy efficiency programs, and we have some incentives and some design standards and technical assistance that's able to be utilized to help solar be incorporated into the planning and into the design from the very beginning. And that's both for residential and for non-residential, for commercial projects. For existing nonprofit or public projects, we also have some support for the solar system design, because for those projects, we expect that a project is going to be going out for grants, and we want to help provide those incentives early, help mitigate some of the cost and risk of doing that design, even though that you're going to need to go out for a grant and it might take a while. So there's some development assistance design incentives for existing buildings that are nonprofit or public owned, in addition to the installation incentive itself. And then for existing homes and buildings interested in installing solar, we have an installation incentive that's available, and those incentives are also split into a higher income qualified incentive for called the Solar Within Reach program for residential customers who meet that higher, the requirements for that higher incentive level, meet the low income requirements for that higher incentive level, and for low income service provider businesses as well. These incentives are relatively prescriptive, and as I mentioned, the trade allies early are the experts on how to make sure that your system will qualify to meet those requirements. And the first step for pursuing any of those incentives can be taken by going to our website and filling in the form, energytrust.org/solarbid, right there on the bottom. In addition to Energy Trust funding, we recognize that we are not the only funding that's probably going to go into a project, especially some of the larger projects or projects for nonprofit customers. There are other funding sources that are available, and the solar incentives that we provide are just one step. They fit in very well with those other funding sources by providing some upfront support during that design phase, by decreasing the out-of-pocket cost, and by positioning the project to be better able to access funds, whether those be tax credits, incentives from state, or grants from federal agencies or the utilities. Again, solar trade ally contractors are the experts on solar, and not only on the technical design, but also on figuring out the right funding combination that might be available. And they are a great resource in understanding what options are out there. I just want to talk a little briefly about the less prescriptive, a little bit more forward-looking opportunities for solar. So as I mentioned before, a solar system without batteries is designed when the grid goes down to turn off, and that's a safety feature. When the utility comes out to turn back on the grid, when line technicians are up working on those poles, they want to make sure that they know where the electricity is coming from. And so solar systems are designed to turn off. By pairing it with a battery storage system and controls, you're able to turn a home or a business into a microgrid. And that's really all a microgrid is. Microgrid can be a home with solar plus storage. It could be a business with solar plus storage, just a single building, or it could be multiple buildings together. This allows you during that outage to power your critical loads and continue to operate the facility to support the critical lifelines of the community. An example of a microgrid is in Northern California at the Blue Lake Rancheria Tribe. They have a microgrid that has been added onto over time. I think it was originally completed in 2017, and it powers several different facilities kind of located right next to each other. In Northern California, they have had to turn off the electricity to the area several times now over the past several years due to wildfire risk in an effort to mitigate that wildfire risk. And then just finishing up, I know whenever I start talking about microgrids, it sounds like it's really far in the future, but it is definitely happening. And really the barriers for seeing more of those happening in Oregon are just the low electricity rates that we have. But we're looking forward to working with customers and pursuing this opportunity for community resilience. It's my job now to hand things over to Dave Moldahl so that he can talk to you a little bit more about the other renewable options. See if I can stop sharing and make that easier for him. Any questions as we make that transition?
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Karen. See if I can make the slides work today. Can you see my slides?
We can. We're looking at the full presentation, not the presenter view, though.
Could you queue up the slides, Karen, for me, please?
Sure thing, Dave. Hang on.
Good afternoon. Again, thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Karen. My name is Dave Moldahl. I'm delighted to be able to talk with you this afternoon. I work with Jenny in the renewable sector at Energy Trust of Oregon, managing the somewhat unfortunately named Other Renewables program. Thank you, Karen. Sorry for the technological glitch on this end. Apologies. To round out our discussion from Energy Trust, I'm going to get into what the support that we provide for what we describe as custom renewable energy generation projects or non-standard, non-solar. Energy Trust is able, through incentives from the public purpose charge, to support a total of 5 technologies. Jenny mentioned solar. We also support municipal-owned community-scale wind, geothermal, hydropower, and biopower. Most of my comments today will focus on hydropower through our irrigation modernization program, as well as I'll conclude with a few comments about biopower, which is certainly relevant for your area of the state. Next slide, please. So much like solar, we support custom renewable energy generation projects, what I like to describe as through 2 buckets of money. We have project development assistance, resources available to pay for all the non-capital costs of project development. This typically involves feasibility studies, pre-design, feedstock assessments, interconnection, the consulting work, the assessments that are needed to determine whether a project's financially or technically viable. This is a cost share program up to 50%. We're willing to commit up to $200,000 of project development assistance per project, which is a substantial amount of money for any particular project. And it's that funding for early stage capital, often the capital that's most difficult to secure. Our second bucket of funding is installation incentives. Jenny's touched on this to some extent, so has Karen, but it pays for up to 100% of the above market costs of the renewable energy resource. What this is, I won't go too far into the weeds, but we do a net present value analysis of the project's revenues and costs, apply a discount rate, and come up with an incentive offer for the project applicant before the project's decided to move forward. So we do this work and make an offer, an installation offer for the technology at hand before the project proponents actually decided to commit to the project. Next slide, please. First, our hydropower program. Again, we are committing and have committed over time significant resources to project development assistance and installation incentives. Most of our work since 2015 has been in supporting the irrigation modernization program, which I'll go into in greater depth in a minute. But in addition to supporting projects for applicants, we also try to navigate and commit funds to identify and address barriers, helping those entities that need help navigating the complex interconnection process, development process, checking all the boxes to figure out how you bring a project from conception to commercial operation. So we have a lot of resources available to share with project proponents. Next slide, please. So since 2008 is when our hydropower program really developed. We've committed project development assistance incentives to more than 100 potential hydropower projects throughout the state of Oregon. Again, we can support projects that are for customers of Pacific Power and Portland General Electric, but also for projects that are outside of the footprint of those investor-owned utilities that have the ability to wheel electricity, deliver electricity to those investor-owned utilities. Just want to make that point. We've committed incentives, installation incentives to 17 projects, over 8.6 megawatts of capacity, generating in excess of 32 million kilowatt hours of energy to the grid every year. In the irrigation modernization program, we've identified in excess of 32 megawatts of capacity. I'll explain a little bit more deeply in a second how we're doing this, but let's just say the pipeline of hydropower projects in Oregon is rich, and there's massive technical potential for hydropower in the state. Next slide, please. So what is the irrigation modernization program? This is a text-heavy slide, but the point I want to take away here is Energy Trust of Oregon since 2015 has been committing substantial resources in to date in excess of a little over $11 million in irrigation modernization to over 25 irrigation districts to date in the state are enrolled in the irrigation modernization program. What is it? It's non-cost shared funds to help our irrigation districts go through technical planning processes from assessments, data collection, water conservation assessments, fish passage assessments, financial analysis of where and when piping and pressurization could happen first and second, culminating in system improvement plans and a watershed plan. Why are we doing this? It's the means to hydropower in the future. We need to modernize our existing irrigation infrastructure. If a irrigation district moves through this process and has an approved watershed plan, it positions the irrigation district to apply for federal funding, critical federal funding through PL 566, a federal law, through NRCS. So once there is an environmental assessment, approved environmental assessment, it positions the irrigation district to apply for federal funding. And these are multi-decade, multi-billion-dollar programs that, but for Energy Trust funding, the critical planning work would probably not happen. So next slide, please. So conventional practices, I'll move through real fast. So we have an antiquated irrigation system in the state of Oregon, like we do throughout the West. We have a head gate diverting water from a lake, stream, creek, delivering water through ditches, canals, and infrastructure that's open flowing to farms and irrigated agriculture. So about 80% of the water consumed in this state is dedicated to irrigated agriculture, delivering to about 6,500 farms, equating to about almost 500 billion gallons of water per year. This is a very inefficient system. And some of our irrigation districts were recognizing that about 60% of the water is lost through infiltration, evaporation, evapotranspiration. The other challenge for this model is farmers and water patrons, of course, are using pumps, very energy intensive pumps to deliver water, pressurized water on stream to wheel lines and to center pivots. That's the conventional practice. Next slide, please. Here's some pictures of the challenges related to operation and maintenance. We've got an old fish screen in the upper left. Irrigation, these canals and laterals and ditches have to be cleaned out every year. So all the sedimentation and debris that clogs the irrigation district's a chronic problem. And there's also public health and safety effects. In the upper right-hand corner was a blowout of an irrigation district in Central Oregon. So all this infrastructure was made in the late 19th century, early 20th century. I kind of equate it to a system that works but doesn't work well, kind of our 2 tracks and gravel roads. And what we're trying to do is to modernize this system to make it much more efficient. And I kind of equate that just to paint a picture of the interstate highway system. Next slide, please. So modernized irrigation, basically starting at the point of irrigation or diversion from the water source, state-of-the-art fish screens, moving this water to farms and ranches in pipe, in conduit, flowing downhill, providing pressurized water. Now, when you divert 1 unit of water, you deliver 1 unit of water. No water is lost along the way. Instead of pumps to move water on farm, there's opportunities for the installation of hydropower projects at turnouts and pressure reduction valves. So we're delivering all the water that we divert now to on farm, and we're delivering pressurized water, which saves farmers, ranchers, water patrons massive amounts of money in terms of costs, significantly less operation and maintenance costs, and of course, the focus of our work is hydropower. Creates huge potential of hydropower for Oregon. Next slide, please. So irrigation modernization. This is a project or program that's going to last decades in the future, but we're already seeing the fruits of the labor of irrigation modernization. This infrastructure can be very large. In the upper left-hand side, some of these pipes can be upwards to 12 feet, high-density polyethylene pipe. We have seen great projects in Central Oregon, some demonstration projects at the Three Sisters Irrigation District. And the bottom right is a ribbon cutting from this last fall. The Central Oregon Irrigation District, who went through the process, has their environmental assessment in place, navigated the NEPA process, is moving on to the first phase of piping 8 miles of irrigation district pipeline. So there's great things happening in the irrigation modernization space. A lot more to come. Next slide. Just a picture to give you a feel for how big this infrastructure can be. Again, 12-foot diameter pipes down to about 4-inch pipes. The piping will occur in the existing and is happening in the existing irrigation district easements. It's going to happen in phases over time. There are some of our irrigation districts in the state, like the Farmers Irrigation District and Three Sisters Irrigation Districts, are reaching the point where they're fully piped and pressurized. Next slide, please. And of course, the focus of our work is hydropower. Here's a 700 kilowatt hydropower project that resulted. and was able to be installed after that pressurized irrigation system was installed in Three Sisters Irrigation District, delivering not only clean renewable energy for the state of Oregon, but providing a revenue stream to help pay for debt service that comes when you, of course, take on significant loans to modernize your irrigation district. Next slide, please. If there's any picture that kind of encapsulates the irrigation modernization program, it's this. This is what you're seeing here is pipe being laid in former open ditches and canals. So now, instead of the farmer using the pump and paying a significant amount of money to pull water out of that ditch, now the farmer is being delivered pressurized water, and that water is being delivered consistently and providing a revenue stream for the ranch and farm. Next slide, please. In the case of if hydropower can't be developed, I want to give you a picture, paint a picture in your mind how it can be built to accommodate hydropower in the future. This is a turnout. This will be an excellent location in the future for hydropower. So as part of the irrigation modernization process, the system improvement plan will identify and are identifying locations where hydropower can be developed in the future. What you're looking at here is a pressure reduction valve system and a turnout, and at some point in the future, hydropower will be developed at this location. Next slide. Besides irrigation modernization projects on farm, on ranch, and owned by irrigation districts, we also support hydropower development for municipalities and for any location where there are basically head and flow. And this is a picture of a 20 kilowatt turbine at Walla Lake State Park, which reached commercial operation about a year and a half ago, producing clean renewable electricity, offsetting pumping load for about 200 water patrons that live at the head of Walla Walla Lake State Park. So a creative application of hydropower. Next slide. So I want to paint a picture just that hydropower is not easy. There are significant barriers to hydropower in Oregon. As Jenny mentioned, we have very, very low avoided power prices. So the best projects, be they hydropower or biopower, are those projects that can generate renewable electricity to spin the meter backwards. Creating electricity and selling it to the utility at the avoided power price is a difficult proposition, but we can help with that. But it's certainly not easy. There's also been a pretty significant reduction in state and federal incentives in this space. And we're constantly confronted with interconnection and access to transmission barriers and wheeling and scheduling fees. Next slide, please. I want to conclude with a little comments on biopower. Besides hydropower, our other focus of our custom project is really on biopower. What is biopower as we see it? It's really extracting renewable energy from organic waste streams as part of improved waste management and sustainability practices. Where do we see those projects in the state? Water resource recovery facilities, those facilities that are operating today, anaerobic digesters producing biogas, confined animal feeding operations, feedlots that have consistent supply of organic material that's available to be converted to biogas, brewery waste, pre and post commercial food waste facilities, food processing facilities, and of course, woody biomass producers, wood processing facilities that can take that otherwise known as wood waste, look at it as a resource, use it to combust, boil water, create steam, and create renewable electricity. Next slide, please. With that, I will save the rest of my time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. This is Karen again. I wanted to see, Jenny and I were having a little chat on the side here. And Jenny, I didn't know if you wanted a quick opportunity to talk about your interaction at Mission Market.
Sure, thanks, Karen. In line with the kind of last few slides I was sharing about microgrids, solar plus storage microgrids. We're actually working right now with the folks over at Mission Market to do a solar plus storage feasibility study to provide the market with an assessment for a microgrid at that site, which is pretty exciting.
Thanks, Jenny. Since we all sort of had to each provide our slides, I'm going to put our contact information here on the chat. And happy to take any of those. Ooh, the formatting. Happy to take any of those clarifying questions now, and look forward to your Q&A later.
Thank you, guys. That was amazing. I didn't know if Donald Williams, we lost him to you guys, which we're a little bit little angry about, but glad that he found a really good, much more improved, I think, job with you guys. And so I don't know if Donald wanted to just say hi really quickly and talk a little bit about the projects that he's going to be working on.
Absolutely. I'd love to take a second and just say hello to the CTUIR and just appreciate the time I had there, and the transition with ETO, or Energy Trust of Oregon, has been amazing, and all the things that they have to offer and the projects that we have working on are just really, it's an amazing group to be with, and quite the transition. But I'm glad I can be here, and now I'm filling the capacity of Eastern Oregon Energy Advisor, so I'll be in this area to help with this primary area from Walla Walla up to below Hood River. So I will be in this area and be local in the community, so I'll be accessible and be here. And I just wanted to say hello and introduce myself in a different capacity, and thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Donald. I'm really glad that you found that job. It sounds perfect for you, and we're excited to work with you in a different capacity these days. Karen, I don't know if you had final thoughts for your presentation before we kind of move on. I am having some technical difficulty, so I can't see the chat. So if there are any questions, if someone could help out and just kind of flag those or read them out, that would be great too.
I guess I'll finish up with my pat thing, which is if you take anything away, take my business card. In all seriousness, Energy Trust's best opportunity to provide support is at the earliest stage possible, when it's a thought in your head. We do have program cash incentives, but we also have a wealth of technical resources and other mechanisms of support. We can write letters of support for projects that are served by our service utilities. But if it involves energy and it's in our service territory or connects to one of our utilities, please reach out and we will connect you with the most appropriate resources and the best resources that we have.
Thank you. That's perfect. I think we'll probably be working with you on that. There was a question, is there a financing need/gap for residential solar panel installation?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So there's the Energy Trust incentive for residential projects decreases the upfront cost, the out-of-pocket cost to the customer. And then for residential projects, you are also eligible for an investment tax credit, the federal tax credit. That's 26% of the project cost. There is still a remaining amount, and it does need to come out of pocket upfront in order to pursue solar. Each solar contractor usually has a variety of different financing options, and so there are some available options out there. Everyone's always looking for the best financing option, but there are a variety of tools available for customers interested in pursuing solar.
Perfect. Thank you, Jenny. I think that we are going to move along. We're kind of getting towards our time here. And so I'm really excited to get to share with you a video, a pre-recorded video that Althea Hussey's Wolf was able to record for us. Again, we are thinking of her and sending our thoughts with her because she had a loss in her family and so was not able to make it to this. And so we're very, very fortunate that she did pre-record her session. I'm trying to kind of figure out the order of operations here. It's not giving me my listen to this panel. So give me just a second to figure this out. Oh, think I saw it. The reason that we're going to switch gears pretty radically here and talk about the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, because there are, no form of energy is free, and there are a lot of trade-offs that we have sometimes with energy production. And so Hanford serves actually as this really interesting, unique example. We talked about, Karen and her team talked about the unique things that CTUIR has done with the buildings, the recent buildings, but this is also another unique situation that CTUIR has. And so it's an important lesson on kind of the lingering legacy of some of these. And so I'm hoping that this will play okay, and I'm hoping, Aaron, if you can't hear anything or if there is a problem, please shout out and let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to let Althea speak for herself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Althea Hughes-Wolf. I'm helping Colleen with the CAP presentations, and I'm going to talk to you about some lessons from Hanford from the NRDA perspective. What's NRDA? NRDA is Natural Resources Damage Assessment. Also, I'm the Hanford Policy Analyst for the Department of Natural Resources First Foods Policy Program. So we're going to cover what is NRDA, CTUIR Hanford NRDA team, Hanford Natural Resources Trustee Council, which I will refer to as the trustees or the Trustee Council, CTUIR NRDA guiding documents, navigating NRDA, the new coyote story, and if you have questions, you can send them through Colleen and she'll forward them to me. So NRDA is the process federal agencies like NOAA, DOI, and EPA use to study the effects of oil spills or hazardous releases on fish, wildlife, surrounding habitats, and the public use of those resources. It was established under CERCLA. CERCLA stands for Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. It came into law in 1980, and it's basically where NRDA cases are established. Scientists and trustees work together to identify the extent of natural resource damages, specify the type and amount of restoration required. There are 3 steps. Once NRDA is established, trustees are established, and together they work on preliminary assessment. And so for us in our preliminary assessment, we established a injury assessment plan. And that injury assessment plan included a project execution plan. And that's what we're working from right now. The last remaining step for the 3 steps is restoration implementation, and we're not there yet. That's a picture of Hanford and its single shell tank farm. So this is a map of Hanford taken from the CLUP. It stands for Comprehensive Land Use Plan, Environmental Impact Statement. It's basically showing you how they plan to use the land, and it's through the NEPA process they have to do this. They want to consolidate waste management operations to the Central Plateau. So as you can see, the red and black area, that's 200 area, also known as the Central Plateau. So they've basically tried to bring everything from the outskirts into the Central Plateau. The green area is U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Some people know that southern area where Rattlesnake Mountain is as ALE, stands for Arid Lands Unit. And this is a really well-labeled map, and I have a map I'm going to show you later, but this gives you a better proximity of where everything's at. So the CTUIR Hanford team split into 2 cooperative agreements. There's the base budget, which everybody knows as EESP, and Mason Murphy is the manager of that cooperative agreement and that program. And NERDA is now under the First Foods Policy and Protection Program. And Chris Marks is our manager and primary contact for this DOE cooperative agreement. I assist Chris with doing reports, and I attend different meetings. Well, you'll see those later. Our NERDA staff is Rayanne Oatman, our administrative manager. Teddy Bronson is our administrative assistant. The policy and tech team, who primarily work on NERDA, is Naomi Stacy, our attorney, assigned attorney, myself as the Hanford policy analyst, and Alex Nazarelli, who's our nuclear engineer and primary technical staff. The Hanford NERDA staff and the trustee council participation. So when the NERDA was established, it was established through a settlement agreement, which I'll show you that process on the next slide. We became a trustee on the NERDA. So as a trustee, we all have our own guiding documents to ensure that cleanup and restoration happens to our trustees' needs. And we have multiple processes we go through, and it is dependent on funding. And sometimes, should we come into a disagreement on, say, a plan or a work group conclusion, or we disagree on a resolution through the trustee council, the issue is elevated from our primary level, which is the trustee council, to our senior level, which in this case is Naomi Stacy. So Alex Nazarelli is our primary and technical trustee member. I am the alternate, and he is training me to replace him on the trustee council. The guiding documents for our participation at Hanford through NERDA, of course, is the Treaty of 1855, and then our Constitution and Executive Order 1441 that recognizes not only our treaty, but our usual and custom and ceded land exclusive rights at Hanford area. The Yakama Nation did start a litigation against Department of Energy and Department of Defense that resulted in a settlement agreement, where that is how we're a trustee on the NRDA, the NERDA. And through that participation, the trustee council has established an MOA that basically identifies the level of involvement, basically kind of the expertise of each trustee, their purpose on the council, and of course, if we do have conflict, what are means of trying to find resolution to those conflicts. And then the bylaws basically regulate how we will treat one another, handle documents that are for the council only, and how to release them to the public. We do make sure we all agree on what is released to the public. For example, the tribes, we would like to maintain confidentiality on certain areas of Hanford that might have some cultural resource sites on them. So all of that gets approved by the council before it's released to the public. As a trustee in the settlement, the CTUIR has some specific guides we follow, which is our Hanford policy, the DNR First Foods mission, and of course, the visions that are coming out of DNR so far. We have the River Vision and the Upland Vision. The photo on the right here is of the 100K area where sludge was removed from away from the river to the Central Plateau. So this is a map that our tribal GIS made upon my request. It's less detailed than the previous map because I wanted to see what our ceded boundary was. And to note, putting the ceded boundary on there does not diminish our usual and custom rights at Hanford. It's just a visual I wanted to see. So the 100 areas are where the reactors are, and they had cooling ponds and sludge dumps at these sites. Most, if not all of which was removed to the Central Plateau. Again, that's what NERDA is doing. We are going to make sure we have the appropriate monitoring and testing formulas and plans to make sure the toxins are removed away from those sites to the Central Plateau. Let me see, I gotta go through my notes here. Oops. Oops. Okay, so what I'm trying to point out in this photo on the bottom left, that is the 618-19 burial grounds. This is found northwest of the 300 area. So if you look on the map, you'll see a 300 down in the bottom right corner of the map. And you just visually go up northwest, just below the Columbia Generating Station. That's where those burial grounds are located approximately. And the thing about those is in 2011, they started to try to identify what was exactly dumped in that area, and they still haven't been able to categorize it. So it's a ongoing process with that area that I'm pretty positive EESP, Mason's crew, is monitoring and keeping track of for us. But that's just to show the complexity of the Hanford site and how sometimes NERDA staff and EESP staff have to coordinate on certain areas because, for example, this area has not even been categorized. We still don't exactly know what's in it yet, but we know it's highly toxic. So navigating NERDA, it is a very complex process. Most people who are in NERDA for this Hanford site have been involved in it for a better part of 10 years. If they haven't been involved in Hanford, they've been involved in NERDA. And NERDA encompasses from the CERCLA and RCRA, which is another form of, it's another regulation that we use to govern, manage spills and toxic waste. So not all of the policies and laws apply to a specific, I guess, act at Hanford. So the way we've been able to categorize all that is through the injury assessment plan that was finalized in 2013, which led to the project execution plan, the PEP, which was finalized in 2016. The PEP created teams and work groups each trustee was able to participate in. So for example, some of those work groups are the terrestrial team, aquatics team, the Hanford Aquatic Restoration Plan team, which is also known as HARP, groundwater upwelling, etc. And so each one of those work groups and teams are referencing back to the injury assessment plan and the PEP and all the documents named under those tasks. So for example, if we're trying to make sure we're managing a certain section of the river on the Hanford site appropriately, we try to find somewhere that has already been through some sort of management that's similar with a similar habitat and a similar ecosystem, basically. So we're doing a lot of comparing and contrasting, which involves reading scientific papers and focusing on peer-reviewed papers to make sure that the science has been worked out in those. And all of those go into our restoration planning. And those documents will be used as references during the restoration phase. And Alex and I divvy our time up between all of these work groups and these different teams. The tribal loss service scenario is nearly complete. It's very important because in CERCLA, you don't focus on the human risk, but because of our tribal status, we are able to incorporate the impact of exposure on humans by way of practicing our treaty rights. So what this does is it utilized the 100F area, and Alex Nazarali, he was able to create a formula that showed all the different routes of exposure that put CTUIR members at risk. And that's going to be used in the injury determination process of the NRDA. So the 100F is located at the very tip top of our ceded land border, which is the red and white striped area. And the 100F, all these areas that have wells, monitoring wells, and that's what he was able to use. And like I said, it's nearly complete. So the new coyote story, Hanford is very unique in all of NRDA. The potential responsible party is Department of Energy and Department of Defense, but primarily Department of Energy, because it's also a trustee and primary funder of all the activities for the NRDA. This can create some hesitation at the trustee council, but again, that's why we have the MOA, where we can resolve any kind of conflicts. The trustees are 2 states, multiple federal agencies, and 3 tribes. There are other areas that have this kind of trustee setup, but there are none that have hazardous materials that are radioactive. So for example, iodine-129, it's generated from spent fuel by the fission process as a decay product. It does have the longest half-life of 15.7 million years, and its impact to human mammals in general is through the thyroid. And generally, parts of it do leave the body through the regular human system, but the thyroid does absorb I-129. So the way some of the pathways of exposure are water, air, and the air primarily being through plants. And it can get absorbed into roots. In our PEP, it was An example was provided that it was in the roots of rice plants. So as you might know, there are an abundance of roots out there on the Hanford site. Granted, a lot of them are on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife areas, but it doesn't mean that some of those areas will not have some of our commonly gathering roots on them. So how do we incorporate a new coyote story to basically warn future generations about the Hanford area? The picture, the vertical picture with the blue glow, that's of cesium and strontium capsules. As they decay, they do lose color and change color. And of course, there's our radioactive material warning signs. Hopefully they still look like that. Because like I said, iodine alone takes 15 million years, its half-life is. And then just to give you an idea, those are alpha, beta, and gamma rays. And there's an example of how paper can stop alpha rays. The bottom right corner is what I'm talking about, the picture there. So the alpha ray is the blue and red, and paper can stop an alpha ray. A beta ray can be stopped by aluminum, and a gamma ray can still get through lead. So it's not just about how long these are going to be around, but also as they break down, so do they change, they morph into a different element. And following that life of a particular element, it may go from gamma to beta, or even if it's mixed with a certain element, a beta can go into a gamma, depending on what it is exposed to, what element it's exposed to. So there's quite a bit of unknowns for Hanford. And so having the cooperative agreements separated as they are with EESP and NERDA, it does help us focus on the task at hand. But the lingering issues like the one I'm presenting here with iodine 129 is how do you manage for that? And because hopefully it's only located in the Central Plateau right now. Because as it is now, the CLUP, what I referenced earlier, according to the CLUP, DOE will always basically have ownership over areas like the Central Plateau. So there'll always be controlled access to that area. Again, the CTUIR alone has pit houses on this reservation that are over 4,500 years old. So 4,500 years ago, we were conducting ceremonies. We had an organized society. So we've been around quite a bit. And I think that's the new coyote story, is how do we manage future generations and warn them against the dangers at Hanford. That's my contact information. If anybody has any questions for me, or Colleen can forward questions to me. I'm sure if I misspoke, Mason will correct me. So I hope I got everything right, and I hope you all enjoyed the presentation.
So thank you, Althea, again, for being able to present with us today. That Hanford is kind of a terrifying thing to me, so it's always interesting to hear more about it and to recognize that this is something that the tribe is going to have to deal with for a long time, and that you know, energy and some of the other things stored at Hanford have this long legacy, and that's an important thing to remember. We are running a little bit long on time, but I just wanted to, before we finish up our discussion with Mason Murphy, who's going to talk about tribal sovereignty and energy, Althea mentioned the need for modeling and monitoring. And so we will, I'd like to have Matthew Campbell maybe introduce himself very, very quickly, because he is going to be doing some of this modeling related to Hanford. And so Matthew, if you wanted to say just a few words here really quickly, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Matthew Campbell. I've been on since January, and I'll be working with Hanford air quality modeling, and then I'll also be working on air toxics modeling for specific sources that may affect tribal lands and first foods. So happy to be on the team.
Thanks, Matthew. And now, without further ado, I'm going to let Mason take it away and round us out with conversations of tribal sovereignty and energy. Thank you, Mason.
Absolutely. Well, I will thank you, Colleen, for putting this on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today. My name is Mason Murphy. I grew up in Pendleton, Oregon, and have lived here a majority of my life. And right now I'm the Energy and Environmental Science Program Manager. I just tend to call it the ACE Program Manager. Today I want to chat with you a little bit about tribal sovereignty as it relates to specifically energy. You can see a couple of different main words here that we'll probably get into. So I'm not actually going to give you an overview on what I'm going to get into, because it is already here: land, territory, treaties, infringements, states, and first foods and energy. Okay, one moment. There we go. So first we need to start out with understanding what sovereignty is and what it isn't. The first thing we need to understand is there's both internal and external sovereignty. So sovereignty is really the authority of an entity to govern itself. And so you can imagine that there are both internal issues with a sovereign. So for instance, in CTUIR, for example, there are tribal members, and those tribal members are what you would call the internal group in the sovereign. So that sovereign entity has the authority to govern that internal group. It also has the authority to work externally with other sovereigns. And so this is something that we do frequently with states and federal organizations. So for instance, when we work with the state of Oregon or the state of Washington, that is an example of external sovereignty and us working as sovereigns. So there are three types of sovereignty: directo, de jure, and de facto. So directo is that sovereignty by a right, so example, a treaty right, or by a moral principle, or in this case, the natural law definition is the rule of human action prescribed by the Creator and discoverable by the light of reason. In other words, it's pretty easy to tell what the natural law is, and I think the First Foods mission has done a pretty good job of demonstrating that. Also Tamanwit. De jure, the sovereignty by legal decree or legislative act. This is basically sovereignty in the courts. And then de facto is that sovereignty in practice. And so we'll get into more details of that here shortly. But in general, I want to also outline the three principles of U.S. Indian law. So obviously the treaty is very important, and then there are these three major sections of the Constitution that generally outline that principle. So one of them is that Indians are not to be taxed, that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. As you can tell, there are three sovereigns listed here: foreign nations as an external sovereign, and then the internal sovereigns of the states and the tribes. At this time, the tribes are probably considered an external sovereign, as were probably the states. The 14th Amendment, Section 2, amends some apportionment of those taxes. And then those three main concepts of tribal sovereignty are the territorial sovereignty, that tribal authority on Indian land is organic, and it's not granted by the state that they're located in. And we have the plenary power doctrine, which demonstrates that Congress has the ultimate authority with regards to Indian tribes, and that the trust relationship is that the federal government has a duty to protect the tribes. And that's really important when we get into looking at, as Althea was discussing, the Hanford site. So in general, I like to think of tribal sovereignty as a cycle. And in the middle of the cycle, per Colleen's suggestion, I put Tamanwit. I kind of had it out over on the side somewhere. You know, Tamanwit is this this natural law, this understanding that we need to work with this natural systems in a way that is reciprocal and that benefits us as well as the environment that we're working with. This is a hard thing that doesn't necessarily come into play in the state. And so what happens in the state is, as we were discussing with directo types of sovereignty, they are done with rights. So constitutions, Bill of Rights, those sorts of policies and framework type governmental documents. So initially, a treaty right in this case is identified as a directo right. A governance activity is performed by the sovereign entity. So let's say in our case of monitoring airsheds, we begin to start monitoring those airsheds. That becomes de facto sovereignty. We continue that activity until it's routine habit and procedure, as we've done with our air program and our air project, and we are continuing to monitor, and we've been doing so for so long that some of the original reasoning behind doing those activities is not known. And so we had to look into understanding why that was originally there. But the important thing is that is de facto sovereignty. You've done it so much until it becomes that habit. Eventually, that governance activity may be questioned legally or procedurally. Basically, somebody comes and says, you don't have the authority to do this governance, this de facto activity. So then it goes into a court system, and that court either upholds or revokes that treaty right, or that, in this case, that activity is either upheld or revoked. And then it's reconfirmed as a treaty right, and that cycle continues. So at first I wanted to take a look at sovereignty and federal policy. I just recently added these two, CERCLA and RCRA. This is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And the only reason I added those is because those are the two main acts that Hanford is forced to adhere to. But as far as sovereignty and federal policy, I really only wanted to focus on these two, the Indian Self-Determination Act and the Executive Order 13175 issued around 2000. So this executive order suggests, it requires each agency of the federal government to develop a plan to engage in consultation, and I left it as a lowercase c for a reason, which I'll talk about later, with tribes that would be affected by a federal undertaking. So DOE has their own specific policy on this. It's called Order 144.1. EPA has their own policy on it. It's called the Policy on Consultation Coordination with Indian Tribes, and BIA as well has theirs. This memorandum, you can click here and we can see what that looks like. A new executive order, 14008, was recently issued by President Biden, and that reaffirms the government's desire to ensure that each agency develop a plan and engage in consultation with tribes. I also wanted to note, since this is a public forum, and that some of you may be wondering, okay, well, how do I help or how do I impact sovereignty? One of the best ways you can do it is vote. Vote for candidates that align with the acts that you want to see passed. How else can you help? You can personally help expand tribal sovereignty by sending a letter to Congress. If something just doesn't sit right with you, send a letter to your congressman or congresswomen. You have a direct link to those people and you've already voted for them. So keep up the good work. Sovereignty is strengthened through self-determination. And what I mean by self-determination, I mean literally just doing it. Indian Self-Determination Act gives tribes the ability to strengthen sovereignty through self-governance. It does this in a couple ways, but one of the biggest ways it does it is providing funding. I didn't put it here, but I did color this green because it is important to remember that money is critical to sovereignty. One thing I found interesting while I was looking into some of this is that tribes who fail to self-govern but continue to remind the federal government of their trust and treaty obligations have generally made the least progress towards expanded sovereignty. I think that's important, but in other words, just do it. So to expand sovereignty, we have to get into a position of continually exerting these self-governance capabilities. It's also important to recognize if you wanted to burn on a non-burn day and we say, no, it's not a good day to burn, the reason we're doing that is not to be a thorn in your side, but rather to continue to expand that sovereignty, because we want to make sure that at the end of the day that the tribe is regulating its airshed and not necessarily the city, the state, or another federal agency that may or may not have in-depth understandings. So I wanted to take a look at sovereignty at the technical level, so you kind of get an understanding of what these activities look like as we perform them on the ground. So EPA Clean Air Act and the Federal Air Rules for Reservations were both important acts that allowed CTUIR to be treated as a state for regulatory purposes. And as you know, states are sovereign entities. And so once you get treatment as a state, that's as good as sovereignty. And so you can see I put a risk of the level of sovereignty. So green being the lowest risk, our interactions with the EPA, we are very much treated as a sovereign. We have authority by federal regulations. We're treated like a state for monitoring airshed, establishing burn permits, and we have financial assistance agreements with EPA to strengthen our regulatory abilities. As you can see, the DOE Environmental Management Hanford Cleanup section, a little bit in the medium to higher risk. The original tri-party agreement, which is the agreement that forces DOE to achieve its milestones, didn't include the local tribes. Even though all three of the different tribes, the Yakima, Nez Perce, and CTUIR, all have ceded lands into the Hanford site. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act provided a mandate for funding to tribes, which was great. We don't like unfunded mandates per the unfunded mandates rule. And it provided that funding for the duration of nuclear siting activities. And it provided roughly $1 million per affected tribe, or $3 million per tribe per site. In this case, it would be roughly $1 million per tribe. That act came out in 1984, I believe. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but if the inflation was applied to that number should look more like $3 million per year, something we're currently trying to work on with DOE. Government-to-government consultation, again, lowercase c, underlined for a reason, is present but needs expansion. One of the only positive things at the DOE site is our financial assistance agreements, and we do have them. They aren't, maybe this actually should be like a light green. And the reason, I want to explain the reason for this lowercase consultation, because this is a very serious issue, I think, in general with the federal government and tribes, is that the federal government tends to view consultation as an informational session, where if you were present and you saw and you heard information or saw a presentation, that you were consulted with. The tribes and most anyone else who actually understands or knows the dictionary definition for the word consultation understands that that is an iterative process where we are both working together to a final solution. So Hanford is really a great example of the challenges of sovereignty and the importance of the tribes in exercising de facto sovereignty. And you can see the other two. You can see the three agencies: U.S. Department of Energy, Washington Ecology, and U.S. EPA as the main regulators of that TPA, tri-party agreement. Past Hanford activities, 1939 to roughly 2011-ish. I mean, that's not exactly right, but depends on what you count. So in general, you look at it, there was this new technology to save the world, or circa 1940s, right? We have this technology that can suddenly stop all the wars and and finish the question of who should be in power, I suppose, or who can control the narrative. Just like with a lot of other energy technologies, the ability to develop plutonium was new, and it was not fully known what the consequences would be. So you can see here, there's the Columbia River, and here is one of the early facilities for developing that radioactive material. Here is a puck of plutonium. Here's the periodic table piece. Here's a landfill full of who knows what. And then one of the major current risks at the Hanford site right now, and one that Althea was talking about, was the iodine-129 that's moving through in a plume through the groundwater. It's no longer in the Central Plateau. It is actually moving east towards the river, and it looks like it might be there in the next model. So it's definitely a concern, and she was very correct on it having a half-life of roughly 15 million years. It's also very active in the environment, so it moves around pretty quickly. It's a concern that we're watching. As you can see, these waste was stored in single-shelled tanks below ground, and that waste eventually began to leak out. And you can see here that if you stacked up on a football field all of the waste, it would be a third of a football field high, maybe almost half of a football field high, and then one across. And this is the full profile of what that would look like in waste. So some current Hanford activities, I just kind of pasted up here, the main 3 activities from their Hanford 5-year plan. So ultimately they have the tank waste cleanup, the Central Plateau cleanup, and then the river corridor cleanup. In this map to the right, you can see the Central Plateau is in this middle area that's called 200 area. It's the 200 West and 200 East area. This is where a majority of the really toxic compounds were handled. And in this case, the 200 West area is where the plutonium was actually finished. So it was one of the most contaminated sites. Up here to the top, in the top, you can see I've shown a plume reduction of hexavalent chromium. That was the same contaminant from, well, we don't have to worry about that. Main point, you can see here, from 2011 to 2018, a significant reduction in this plume size. One could argue it might have just gone to the river, but what you don't see here is that in 2013, a pump and treat was installed in this area that significantly reduced the overall contamination. And the way the pump and treats work is similar to this picture here. There's an injection well. They'll pull up water and then water it onto the surface, and then just keep watering those contaminants in or pull the contaminants out, filter them, and then rewater that fresh drinking water back in. Okay. So some of our current activities at the Hanford site, we're doing some environmental monitoring, use of sampling tools and artificial mimics of first foods that uptake targeted contaminants at a documented rate. So we're monitoring resources for protection against known threats. And this is a necessary element of de facto sovereignty. We're also doing some environmental research. We're performing scientific studies to improve our understanding of how environmental threats affect first foods or their access and availability. Some of the interesting work that we've seen at the site, and we will be probably researching here soon, are the various PFAS, which are the fluorinated compounds that can concentrate up to 1,000 times in fish tissues and are genotoxic. In other words, they can affect your genome and cause mutations in your genes. If we look at we've also been looking at the fate and transport. In other words, what happens to the chemicals when they get in the environment and where do they end up? It's really important as things begin to bioaccumulate to understand where they accumulate. We've been developing our long-term stewardship control technologies. One of the first foods at the site, istis, is an edible Opuntia cactus that's very medicinally important, but it also serves as a protector for cultural sites, and we have installed this in areas where we want to reduce traffic. It's also a necessary element of sovereignty to provide a way for institutional controls or preventing the flow of human interaction or human traffic to a certain area. It's what the Hanford site claims they're going to do for eternity on the Hanford site, but it's pretty hard for an institutional control to last beyond the institution. And since the United States is such a young country, it's hard to predict that it will last for as long as these contaminants. The tri-party agreement milestone tracking, the Hanford's regulatory schedule is the tri-party agreement. And so we make sure that we monitor that, and to get any sort of movement on our initiatives, we need to leverage our relationship capital to influence the TPA regulators. One of those regulators is the Department of Ecology in Washington. And so we don't, again, this is another example of poor sovereignty abilities at the site currently, is that we have to work through other sovereigns, or where we have to influence other sovereigns to get the outcomes that we're seeking. So that's that sovereign to sovereign. In other words, sovereign recognized sovereign. We're also working on developing a Hanford air quality monitoring plan, and then commenting on technical documents occasionally. Okay, so I'm just going to end here on this slide. Sovereignty is critical to climate adaptation. So if you look at this image, this is actually a map of the region of the Pacific Northwest from about 15,000 years ago. So this was during the Missoula floods. And as you can see in blue here, these light blue is where all of the basins that were filled up after this glacial dam melted, and the entire Missoula Lake was able to empty in a very short period of time. As you can see, a lake basically filled up what is now the entire Hanford site. And the only place that it did not cover seems to be Lalik or Rattlesnake Mountain. And other than that, most of these other areas were underwater. And as you can see, the tribes have clearly been dealing with climate change for the last 15,000 years. And because of this, sovereignty itself is critical. And so I could just leave it there. If anyone's interested, I have a DOE vision for the future of Hanford. And I'll just spoil the surprise right now and say it is largely revolved around energy. Thank you.
Thanks, Mason. That was great. So I know that we are slightly over time, so I would not begrudge anyone that has to go, but I would still love to give an opportunity to have a discussion. I know that there are a number of really knowledgeable people here on our call. And so right now, I would encourage us now all to be able to turn our cameras back on. So I'm going to do that here first. And Mason, if you want to take down this really beautiful map, I know that in preparing for this conversation, we talked about the fact that tribes have been dealing with natural changes in climate since time immemorial, and that really the best way to do climate adaptation is to promote tribal sovereignty and to give tribes the resources that they need to be able to do the work that they've been doing for thousands and thousands of years on this landscape. And so I would encourage everybody, please turn your camera on. I know the last time that we had a discussion, that was just me in the recording, and it was mortifying to me. Thank you everyone for participating. And so I was wondering if Antone, if you're available, you always have really amazing thoughts on energy and energy strategies. And so I wanted to leave a space for you to share at this moment if you are still on.
Yeah, I'm still here. That was really interesting. I like that, cutting this stuff. I just want to say that sovereignty was restored around the 1970s, I think, or PL 93-638. But what that did was allow tribes to manage their own affairs. And to hire their own employees to do the work for them. And the result of that has been where we're at today, and all that we have accomplished in terms of economy and environmental restoration. We've done a lot on that cutting edge, a lot. The tribe, it hired the people that could get their job together. But I think what's really got to happen right now is that our young people, our high school people, grade school people have to understand what sovereignty means. That when it was restored, that we were able to manage our own affairs like Hanford to help deal with the problems out there. But it also really is it's not only an opportunity, it's a responsibility. Sovereignty is, and the children, the young people have to understand that they got to step up and they got to begin managing these big problems. And then tribes are small, they're tiny, but they got to rely on the larger community to help them. And they got to know how to do that stuff. So I just want to say that's a very good presentation. I think we're on cutting edge right now on climate change, the whole thing, for first foods and all that's cutting edge stuff today. And we got to let our young people know that so that they can become a part of that, get ready, prepare, and to accomplish the goals that are necessary. That's all.
Thank you. That was great. And yeah, I know that getting the youth involved in education has really been a big thing that has come and been highlighted by these webinars. And so, yeah, absolutely. The kids are the future, and really we need to be preparing them and make sure that they know what sovereignty truly means. I know, Wenix, I would love to have you share. And if anybody else has any thoughts, if you want to let me know that you want to speak, why don't you use that raise hand function? Or be sure to jump in the next time there's a silence and let me know that you want to talk. But otherwise, I would love to hear, Wenix, your impressions and thoughts that you've heard today.
I would just like to thank all of our key technical staff for the tribe. You guys all did an amazing job. And I was really impressed with Althea's composure and everything that, you know, she's a little bit new to the position, but she really amazed me and did a really great job of the information she presented, and just really talking about those first foods and what they're doing to those foods. Because from when I first started working with the tribe in Salmon Corps, we did a lot of restoration work out there on the Hanford site, and I was all over that site. At that time, we cleaned out some of those big tanks that used to hold the Nike weapons in, that we had to go in and clean out those ponds to raise smolt in. And there was a lot of things that happened out there on those sites where they'd be shut down. And so you're like, you know, what is going on out here? And I attended a lot of different meetings when they were talking about the contamination just getting into the groundwater. And so it was really great to hear that they actually were, instead of just pumping the water from one side of the reservation to the other at that time, that was the fix, to hear that they have been cleaning it and getting to that place. And there is, as a cultural field tech, when I was back in my early days, you know, I walked a lot of that land, and some of those islands just have hundreds and hundreds of pet houses, and there's cultural resources, and that is our people's area. So it's really great to hear that we're working and moving forward to that. I was really appreciative of all the different energy possibilities, and even the solar panel. And as a tribal member, when we were younger, back when I was like 10, 11, 12, 13, my dad was one of the first people, Native American, had solar panels on our house, and nobody had that. And that was cutting edge, and that helped. He was very smart in that, and just really cutting edge. And so that was something I've always been interested in, to follow in the steps of my father. So I'm really appreciative that we're really looking into that, and just the our tribe does some amazing work. And when we're working in our fields, we really get kind of stuck in what we're doing. We don't get to really hear the amazing work that each department and each staff member is doing related to securing and utilizing our sovereign rights to a full extent, and teaching others and just becoming educated within those, and to be able to see the people that I grew up with, that Althea, who is my cousin, in my, who we played with together out in my yard, to be able to see how we have grown as youth, became educated and stepping up in these roles, just as Donald Williams, who used to be one of my really close friends, and to just hear that professionalism that we see coming across from these webinars, and just the work that we're doing. And our cultural resources are very important, not only just our foods, but with regards to the water, the wind, the energy, and sun, because we have stories about the sun and the wind and the earth and the importance and how they all come in. So it's really great to hear this side, because the energy provides the first part of the sun that synthesizes through the plants, and that energy filters from the sun to the earth to the plants to our foods, and it goes back and forth. And then everything that happens on this land goes into all of us. So I'm really glad that we're working towards that and looking at the future and how we're battling through. No matter what, we're going to do the work we're going to do when I get through, but looking at the climate change in such a bigger way, and just looking at all these different components. And I'm thankful for everyone who presented and our outside agencies who came in and talked. I really enjoyed, because it was really far out of what we're used to listening to. So I really appreciated this webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you, Wennick. I was wondering if there's anybody that has questions, please go ahead and jump. I would love to have, if panelists have final thoughts. So Energy Trust of Oregon, Jenny, Mason, Patrick, if you guys have thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, I think we might be at the end of our webinar. I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more.
I'm not hearing anyone, so I'll just go. I think the one closing thought I wanted to make is that we do need to really recognize that even though energy is important and we all use energy, and energy sovereignty is something the tribes are certainly interested in, it is definitely also, we have to recognize that energy is always going to be it's always going to impact first foods, and even the best solutions are going to impact first foods. And so we need to recognize that and be able to balance those factors as they come to light. That's it.
Perfect. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking about when I asked Althea to present about the Hanford site, is the idea that there is no perfect form of energy. I know that even for, maybe it's something that Jenny can speak to, that sourcing for solar panels, the materials often come from some rather exploitative practices in places of the world. And so it's important for us to consider, as we engage with renewable energy, that we do it in a way that isn't harming other communities that are going to be impacted by the way that we generate this. And so, yeah, it's definitely, we need renewable energy, but also demand reduction to be able to meet the future requirements. Jenny, I don't know if you had final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with today.
Sure, I can say a couple things, and then I think that Karen might be joining us on the phone. So Karen, please feel free to jump in. I think that's exactly right, Colleen. I think that renewable energy is certainly a component, but the first step is, and the fastest step is always to explore conservation and make sure that you're using the energy that you have before you start adding in renewable generation. I think that that's exactly right, and we really appreciate the opportunity to come and join your conversation today and be in the room with you all.
We're grateful to have you. And I want to remind Karen that it's *6 if you want to unmute yourself on the phone.
It's probably a good reminder.
That's a good reminder also for Patrick, who I know is joining us on the phone. And I don't know if, Patrick, you have final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with.
Sure. Yeah, I just think it's really amazing all the opportunities that are out there right now for doing renewable energy stuff, and that it's really kind of in the national and global, if you will, spotlight. I think there's a lot of opportunities, to do it here. And along with the environmental benefits also come a lot of economic benefits as well. And I think there is a really responsible way to go about development. So just look forward to seeing what the tribe can pull off in the near term, hopefully. So that's all. Thanks.
Hey, Colleen, this is Karen Appler. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sure. I apologize. I had to sign off video and join via phone super quick, but I thank you so much for allowing us to participate and join in with this group. And I think, as you know, our organization is not a climate focused organization, but we feel we work with a lot of good people who have good hearts that want to provide support and assistance with these programs. And we feel that our programs do influence this work and would love to be connected in any way we can. So thank you again. And we'll be following up with a lot of individuals, Patrick and Mason.
Perfect. I know that we're thankful for the work that you do, and we're thankful for your collaboration with us on these projects. I even learned about things that I didn't know about Wildhorse and the Yellowhawk building. That was really, really educational. I'm going to leave one last opportunity for anyone that kind of wants to jump in and say anything.
Oh, we should actually mention that we are going to be having some strategic energy visioning sessions in the near future that CTUIR community members will be invited to. So stay tuned for that. We'll probably be posting that on the website.
Perfect. That's an excellent reminder. And I think I'm going to bring the meeting to a close. And I just want to, again, remind you the idea of energy as also an economic benefit leads us really nicely into our next webinar, which will have a little bit of a break for the month of April. We'll be tentatively scheduled our next climate adaptation webinar on climate economics and community for Friday, April 30th. And I want to note the change time on that one. We have a couple people who are part of that incident command team that meets at 2 p.m. on Fridays, and so we want to make space for them. But we're really excited to talk about really the very human systems part of all of this. And so we're excited to welcome our Department of Economic and Community Development, as well as we also will be hopefully welcoming Dave Tubby, as well as another person to be presenting on the Native CDFI, our Nihiawe Community Financial Services. Apologies, I seem to be a little bit frozen. So I don't know what you guys are seeing, but we will also be having our DCFS staff will be talking about their workforce development program, as well as the food distributions that they've been doing this past year. And then we'll get to close out. Hopefully we'll be joined by a member of our Tribal Public Safety Office to talk about emergency preparedness. And as always, we have raffle prizes. And so we will be giving the weekends for people to get submissions and commentary in to be eligible for the raffle. If you attended today, you are eligible for the raffle. And that prize is Indoor Air Quality Monitor, an CTUIR Pro. That has been really interesting information for me. I've been beta testing one in my house, and I know that Wenex has one, and Matthew has one too. And so we've been kind of comparing some of the things that we've been finding in our house. And so it's really interesting information. But I just want to say thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. And I look forward to the next one. Have a great weekend, and I will talk with you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Happy Easter, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.